Welcome to Left, East to West with me, Tom Parkin.
And me, Nikki Hill. Thanks for joining. And if you can, tell others about our new show. Word of mouth is growing in the activist community, and we'd love it if you could share. We always like to start the show talking about a couple of interesting and important items that maybe aren't national headlines yet. But this week, we want to talk a little bit about the Manitoba government taking a huge step forward about equity in workplaces. And then we're going to talk about the Ontario Doug Ford government quietly setting up what looks like a $1.3 billion bailout for some condo developers.
And we have a feature interview with Sussanne Skidmore, president of the BC Federation of Labour and treasurer of the federal NDP. You'll hear Susan's thoughts about growth alternatives to austerity, labour law reform, the difficult task of bringing alignment to Canadian social democratic labour movement, and some other big questions.
Big questions indeed. But before we get to Sussanne, let's take a look at this week below the fold. So as you're getting to know us as co-hosts, you're likely seeing some themes in focus. But in fairness, it's still Women's Health Month in March. So that's where we're drilling into again today. And women's health has so many policy gaps that it always requires advocacy. So with that, before we jump in, I also want to highlight a new poll that came out from the Angus Reid Institute this week that showed that Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew has the highest approval rating amongst Canada's premiers. And let's pin that before we dive into the issue we're going to talk about. So on March 9th, just recently in the last couple of weeks, the Manitoba government announced that they're going to proceed on amendments to their workplace safety and health regulations to require employers to provide menstrual supplies at no cost to employees in workplace washrooms or another accessible location. So this actually made Manitoba the first jurisdiction in Canada to take this really critical step forward towards workplace equity. Now, before we actually get into the menstrual supplies, our woke crowd triggers here, because I know they're coming, you'd actually be surprised, Tom, at how basic necessities can become culture war fodder. But I want to note here, I want to bring another leader into the picture. So in 2024, the Doug Ford government in Ontario actually took a leading step forward on this issue to ensure menstrual supplies are provided on construction sites. So, not a place to politicize here about something that people just need to be able to go to work. But you may recall how the MAGA crowd came up with a new nickname during the election last year in the States as Tampon Tim for Tim Walz after similar initiatives. So we do deal with some low maturity levels on this one. Very triggering topic, apparently, for some people. Not sure about the people that are probably listening to us, can probably handle it. But I think it's also important to note that some of these policies aren't new. December 2023, federally regulated workers and workplaces are required to have menstrual supplies as well for employees. So that's not just our public service, that's also places like airports, ports, a lot of those places that are already under federal regulation. What we're missing here is provincial regulation because there's still a lot that aren't covered in here. These are not new issues. Probably in the last decade or so, there actually has been a pretty big movement around menstrual health. And again, one of these issues, like we talked about with menopause, where there's a fair bit of stigma. So it has taken a lot of advocacy to move forward. But what the facts are, and there's been, study after study, poll after poll, showing that without access to some of these basic supplies, that people will skip work. That it is a conversation about participating in the workforce, not just the workforce, school, community. Being out actually able to engage in your community is really critical here, but something people will skip if they can't access menstrual supplies. So this really is a way to make sure people are staying engaged in their education, staying engaged in their workplaces. Having done advocacy on this issue myself, we have really heard stories about people especially people like retail workers, lower paid people who just skip shifts if they can't actually afford to ensure that they have menstrual supplies on hand. So the concept here is actually pretty simple, even if this is triggering for you. It is that no one actually goes in a bathroom with their own toilet paper, and menstrual supplies are no different. So really what Manitoba is doing here, and again, like the Doug Ford government did, like the federal government did, is making sure employers like toilet paper, like soap that we all expect when we go in a washroom, are ensuring menstrual supplies are there. It's just adding specificity on the requirements for some of the basic hygiene needs. So like toilet paper and soap most would say these are actually essential items, and they're treating them in that way to make sure that workplaces and public washrooms are accessible to everyone. So if we weigh out here, kudos to the Manitoba government. And I think, kudos on being out loud and proud on this as well. Seen lots of MLAs out celebrating, including going beyond the women in their caucus and making sure that some of the men are out talking about this as well and promoting the new workplace regulations. But I think really, if we look at the scale, supplying menstrual products is actually quite a small investment, especially when you're implementing at scale versus being able to ensure people are participating in the workforce and getting into
Mhm,
work. And
mhm.
just one more related note is that in early 2024, the BC government had commissioned a period poverty task force, which I happen to chair as a volunteer. This very same recommendation was delivered to the BC NDP government in 2024 for legislative changes to parallel regulations in BC as a top priority for addressing equity. So now advocates like myself are hoping that the BC government picks up this baton from the Manitoba folks and comes the second jurisdiction in Canada to
Right.
implement it.
Some
How
unfinished
about
business here, huh?
unfinished business in our show today?
I see where you're going on this one. Well, good for you. It's funny. There's also there's another way that I think we kind of forget about this kind of issue, which is that people who don't have a lot of money, um, sometimes, honestly, going out and getting shampoo and soap and toilet paper and tampons is an expense that they literally do not have the money to do.
Yeah,
I know this is this is not a middle class situation, but I
yeah,
have absolutely experienced people who are like, I don't have the money right now to just go
yeah,
to the store and get anything. So
yeah.
how are you supposed to go to work?
But
Anyway,
it
it
actually might
just
be a middle class situation because one of the reasons some of
yeah.
this advocacy came out was seeing that food banks started actually in London, Ontario with a campaign called
Mm.
Tampon Tuesday because food banks never had menstrual supplies. And now
Oh,
that we
okay.
do actually see more middle class folks using food banks, it all does
Mm.
equate into what affordability issues are exacerbating, right?
It's certainly, yeah.
That's probably my last March women's health rant, but there we go. I took the opportunity. So
Well,
over to you, Tom, on your below the fold this week.
okay. Well, Nikki, if you heard anything about Doug Ford last week, it was him making a lot of noise to try and distract people from his new retroactive legislation that overrides a court order for him to surrender his personal phone records that no doubt would have revealed widespread illegal and unregistered lobbying, and probably a
Huh,
whole lot more real sleazy stuff.
huh,
So while Doug is trying to toss out anything that will make a big bang, clang, or flash, he weirdly hasn't thrown in the story of a recent $1.3 billion investment that at top line sounds like a good news story. The Financial Post reports the Government of Ontario, through its Build Ontario Fund, is providing $300 million to High Art Capital, an asset management firm. High Art plans to use the $300 million to attract $1 billion from private sector investors and use all of that money to purchase about 2,000 condo units and
huh,
convert them to long-term rental, about 500 of them being affordable, according to High Art's press release. So that sounds pretty noble, right, Nikki?
uh-huh.
Why? Who wouldn't want to get into that? Well, I reached out to Jeremy Withers. He's a very smart researcher with New Housing Alternatives, a Canada-wide housing research partnership based at the University of Toronto. I reached out to him about the story because to me it sounded a little suspect that they were going so low bridge on the communications. And here's the thing:
So
these
good
two
news
thousand,
not being communicated.
yeah, there's something wrong there. Yeah.
You always
So
wonder.
here's the thing: these 2,000 units are already on the market. They're
Oh,
already
okay.
built or they're well underway in construction. So this $300 million from the good people of Ontario isn't creating even one housing unit. It's a bailout for condo developers who can't unload these condos.
Oh, with the
So
housing market. Hmm.
just to make sure everybody understands that usually condo units are sold pre-construction,
Hmm.
bought by a mix of investors, some big, some small. Their cash finances the construction and lets the developer unload their debt and build using other people's money. We should all try this approach to life, Nikki, I
Hmm.
think. But Toronto's condo market imploded on March the 2nd, 2022, and that was the day the Bank of Canada ended its near zero
Yeah.
interest rate policy as an inflation wave took hold, and from 0.25% The bank hit 5% in interest rates within about a year, and that made the mortgages on new condos too expensive for the
Right.
rent that could be charged. So condos stopped making sense as an
Hmm.
investment. From 30,000 new condo sales in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area in 2021. Last year, there were only
Oh, wow.
1,559. Yeah, from 30,000 to 1,500. Urbanation, a condo market data company, consultancy, reports that at the end of 2025, there were nearly 3,900 completed and unsold new condo units sitting on the market empty.
Hmm.
So these are the units we're talking about. And of course, it hasn't helped that in the rush for everyone to make money from making money in the 2020-2022 period, many didn't care about the quality of the units getting built.
Right.
And a lot of what's sitting out there and not selling is what the industry very, very delicately likes to call dog shit.
Oh,
Condo
you really
prices
want to buy those.
Condo prices have been falling now for 4 years, and they're still not priced to sell. So
Hmm.
condo developers are stuck, unable to sell the units and get their cash out to repay their finances. They're bleeding cash. The values of their assets is falling. So High Art Capital, with $300 million in public money, will kindly take over those units and bail out the developers made bad bets on the condo
Okay.
market. They'll inject $1.3 billion of demand into a dead market, hoping to put a floor under falling condo prices. So it's 300 million we're paying to keep housing costs up.
Hmm.
Makes sense, right? In a Doug Ford
Yeah,
kind of way, I suppose.
apparently.
Yeah. So in essence, what they're doing is they're creating a bad bank that will repackage those condo units into an asset fund, sequestering these bad assets from the market. Uh, the press releases by High Art and Build Ontario Fund give very little information on the details of what our dear friend Uncle Doug negotiated for us. We don't know the term. We don't know the interest payment on the 300 million. Uh, there's no clarity about how secured this 300 million is. High Art's press release is odd in another way. If you check out their website, it appears to be the only press release the company has ever issued. If you
Oh,
look at the
interesting.
bios about the company's leadership team, there's nothing, not a single word. How's a company that appears to have not existed until a few weeks ago got a guarantee of $300 million from Doug Ford? Kind of mysterious. And the last curious thing about High Art's press release is the name on the bottom. For more information, it says contact Larissa Whaler. She's a lobbyist. And Nikki, do you
Hmm.
know who she used to work for?
I don't.
Okay. Well, she was the executive director of communications for the developer's best friend himself, Douglas Robert Ford Jr., Premier of Ontario.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, final thought on this one. What if instead of using $300 million to bail out investors and put these units back on the market, rinse and repeat, the financing put these units into non-market owners, like the people who will actually live in them?
Hmm. And can't possibly be the only jurisdiction dealing with this challenge right now,
Well,
but
I would think your jurisdiction
yeah,
is also because like what we experienced here in the
absolutely.
housing market was like Vancouver's always had a problem
Yeah.
with housing for a long, long time. But briefly, the Toronto prices were in excess of Vancouver prices. But now the implosion is the
Hmm.
price implosion over, and you can look at the chart. The day that the interest rates went up, that was the end.
Yeah.
It's been on a dive now for it's over 4 years. Prices have been tumbling. So yeah, there's a lot of people bleeding money. Their assets are not worth what they used to be,
Hmm.
and they're desperate. And there's Doug. So I'm sure Mr. Eby's getting pressure on this kind of stuff too.
Yeah, a lot of housing pressure for sure. I think this government's probably been a lot more clear on their stance on some of the investments, and I
Mm.
mean that's pivoted a little bit lately too. But I don't see a solution like this being proposed right now.
Hmm. Okay. Well, anyway, let's be back with Sussanne Skidmore for our feature interview in a moment. Sussanne Skidmore, president of the BC Federation of Labor. Welcome to Left, East, West. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. So, Sussanne, you're BC Federation president since 2022. after 2 terms as the BC Fed Secretary Treasurer. Before that, since 2014, you were Executive Vice President of the BC GEU, the Government Employees Union. Originally out of, I understand, Local 1211 in Prince
Yeah.
George, yes, where you
Yeah.
worked in the court system. And you're also the National Treasurer of the New Democratic Party of Canada. So that's a lot of stuff. So thanks for making the time to speak with us.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. As you can imagine, it's never a dull moment around here. Many hats, but I think they're all pretty important. I also serve as a vice president to the provincial NDP
Oh,
as well on behalf of the labor movement, and
okay.
so it's all really important work. But I'm always happy to do it, being at the hub of things that are going on, where sort of labor and politics come to meet. And honestly, it's never been more important time to be doing
Mm,
this work, and so
yeah.
I'm always happy to do it.
Well, good for you.
There's probably a few things we missed as well, but so we are left east to west, so we're talking a bit national and a
Yeah.
bit jurisdictional today, but trying to bring it in for our listeners across the country as well. So obviously, Suzanne, you're elected here in BC at the BC Federation of Labor, but your role does require a national scope in many ways, and you're frequently, I see all the time, you're lobbying with Canadian Labour Congress and others in Ottawa, federation leaders, and talking to politicians across the country about workers' needs. So, as you don't need to be told, we're seeing austerity budgets across all jurisdictions, provincially, federally, all provinces really at this point. Large deficits coming out as provinces in particular release their budgets in the last weeks and the coming weeks. What do you think the impact is of these budgets on workers as governments are trying to address issues like deficits and trade disputes?
Yeah, we know that, having challenging budgets is rough on all workers, not just public sector workers, but of course the workers who rely on the services that may be at jeopardy when we're looking at big cuts. Here in British Columbia, we are just coming out of the longest public sector strike in BC's
Yeah.
history with the BC GEU, now the General Employees Union, not the Government Employees Union.
Mhm.
That's a podcast for another day, I'm sure. That was a long strike, and the PEA folks who were out on strike with the
Mhm.
BCGU, they just ratified
Yeah.
last week, and so good news story there. But of course, we know that like it's tough to govern. We know that, but a strike like this should never to have taken this long,
Yeah.
and it's going to create some challenging times, I think for government. And then when we look at the federal scope, right, we're looking at, federal workers who are dealing with an arbitrary, badly thought out return to work plan, return to the office, on top of layoffs and a full decade of this fiasco of the Phoenix pay system, right? So
Yeah.
these are big things that are already falling on workers' lap, and it is a sign that things are going to continue to be rough for working people. Now, the good news is there's a bit of a silver lining. Lots of these folks have good collective agreements, and the public sector bargaining that's happening here in BC, it's starting to move along a little quicker thanks to some of the good deals that got set. But there is still some tough negotiating happening here in BC.
Mhm.
One of the biggest ones that's going to be very challenging is public secondary sector or the post-secondary sector.
Mhm.
They're still all at the table while we're having a bit of a review of the system. And all
Mhm.
across the country, we know that the post-secondary public post-secondary sector is built on how important public sector education is at all levels. But then, the model then became dependent on international students and
Yeah.
the funding of international students. And that has changed. And, when we're looking at deficit budgets and we're looking at investments that government should be making, we also need to be making sure that they're continuing to invest in things that are so critical to the economy and the country, like public post-secondary
Mhm.
education.
Mhm.
It's tough on workers when we think about things like the threat or the fear of layoff, having been
Yeah.
through it myself in the early 2000s when Gordon Campbell and his lot got elected, and that uncertainty of labor relations. But we know working people have already had to do a lot of carrying the burden of this, doing more with less over a long time. And that shouldering that heavy burden has a long-term impact, especially in a time when workers actually need the services that the public servants provide, right?
Mm. Yeah, we had
Yeah, absolutely.
economist Adlika Ivanova from the BC Policy
Hmm.
Solutions on the podcast a few weeks ago, and
Yeah.
she made a couple of I think, pretty clear but important points. One, that the private sector doesn't create wealth in a vacuum. It does so more or less successfully because of the right public sector investments from schools or healthcare, post-secondary, roads, affordable housing. Second, um, growth and employment produces the public revenue to keep this positive cycle going.
Hmm.
Austerity and unemployment does not. So, I guess the question I want to ask you is, as a social democratic labor movement, are we bold enough about the need for jobs and growth, and
Yeah.
proud enough when we have some good outcomes? What can we do better to try and keep this virtuous circle running for us?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's such a great question, right? In times like this, in the moment that we're in, working people need to know all across this country that government actually has their backs, that we're going to
Mm,
like get through this together. And they need to be seeing those tangible differences in their lives every day. They need to be able to feel it at the kitchen table, at the gas pumps, in the grocery store, when they're contemplating paying their rent or even remotely considering getting into a mortgage or something like that. And of course, at a deeper level, they need to see it connected to a broader vision, something, that is going to provide areas of hope for them and opportunity. And there's a real opportunity in budgets, provincial and federal budgets. But of course, there are big gaps as well. And so as a movement, we can empathize with the challenge of governing right now. But as hard as it is to govern, it's even harder for folks to make a living and just get by. And that's what we're focused in on. And, we know that the governments, both federal and provincial, are very hyper focused on spending, right? But there's a lot that they could be doing, things that they could be more bold and courageous around, doing things like, increasing taxes on large corporations and, of course, the ultra wealthy. And, there is more room to be bold. There is more room to, show up more positively in people's lives every day, I think, than they even realize. So we're going to continue to push on that. We're going to be probably a bit more forceful than we even have
mm,
been up to
mhm,
this point, and making sure that we're pointing that out. And, as a labor movement, we need to make sure that we are strong, pointing out progress when we've made it, celebrate the wins, but also pointing out the progress that they could be making as well, right? So, I mean, we've seen some pretty big historic investments here in BC,
mhm.
particularly around training, trades training,
Yes.
the crane safety announcement that was
Mhm.
just last week that was announced, presumption around firefighters and cancer. It's a real commitment to show working people that this government is with them, as well as things like contraceptives, funding for HRT, hormone replacement therapies, diabetes medication. Those things are actually making a huge difference in people's lives. Just the other day, one of my girlfriends was like, just came back from getting my free HRT, and obviously more work to do there. I know that Nikki's, had her finger on the pulse of this one. I'm watching it really closely as well. But there's also really big federal victories that our caucus, the NDP caucus, pushed forward,
Mhm.
through really tough times during COVID, right? We saw some huge COVID relief improvements because the NDP team had their eye on the pulse and a connection to
Yeah.
working people to actually see what was going on for
Mm,
them, and able to push for incredible improvements. Dental care, pharmacare, even my dad's a pensioner. I mean, he gets dental care now. He doesn't
mhm,
have to pay it out of his pension
mhm.
check. Like, that's something that
It's huge.
people can actually see and feel, and it is
Yeah.
huge. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because I went and got my HRT refilled the other day, and I've been promoting it, and I was like, "0? I don't understand." Right?
Yeah.
You're like,
Yeah, it's a big
"What
win.
just
Yeah.
happened?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And so speaking of other things I did, I went and filled up at the pump today, and
Mm,
gas prices are just through the roof. So, we're talking about those affordability issues for people, and how governments, get the backlash when prices are going up. We've been talking about grocery prices on the show, but that is a big jump, I think, looking at the
Mhm.
war in Iran, that people
Yeah.
are going to be feeling as well. And then that's that pushback to governments to do something about it. So we're
Yeah.
in a tricky time, I think, for decision makers for sure. But
Yeah.
let's sort of switch gears into, we already have, 1.5 million Canadians who are unemployed. We don't see a lot of media attention on this. And, I do think we've seen a fair bit from in the last year since the changes in the US administration to not just BC, but federally really pushing in on major projects agenda to look at the building projects. They talk infrastructure, major projects,
Yeah.
capital, a lot of natural resource projects here. And then, of course, we're also seeing this defense policy rise up as a way to be growing the economy. But in terms of an industrial policy federally, there, doesn't seem to be as much of that building into our existing strengths. A lot of it is on procurement, tax policy. We, happy to see skills and infrastructure in there, of course. But what about some of those value added industries? Here in BC, the shipbuilding, for example, has been a big topic of discussion well before I think
Hmm.
we even started to see this impact from the States.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I listened to the podcast with Bryn, and,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
so it was with Bryn Burke from the BC Building Trades, and we have been right alongside with them on this campaign around building ferries here, building boats here, and making sure we're investing in that system. And look, like I said, I don't envy the premier cabinet choices around the things that they have
Yeah.
to decide every day, but when we're looking at the BC ferries or the ferry decision that was made, it did feel a little bit like a managerial decision and less like a strategic one.
Mm.
And, when we're looking at decisions like this, we have to keep our eye on, the government, right? And, we're going to keep pushing for that, is keeping our eye on the bigger picture, right? Building
Yeah.
like more resilient, more sustainable economy that works for people right here in British Columbia. We missed an opportunity of a generation building those boats here
Mm.
in BC, training the workers, building the boats, and, fully sourcing them, right? Yeah, sure, we'll probably get them faster and cheaper this one time, but, we really had missed that opportunity to level up our workforce, level up our capacity, and also to build local economies and source local
Yeah.
materials as well. And so, we know we're competing with countries that do see things that way, that, cheaper and faster is better. But when you have a big opportunity like building, like boats in BC or any of these big projects in BC, we want the government to be bold. We want them to put forward some very positive, examples of things that are going to change. Like we've been doing a lot of work on a report that we put forward. It's called Connecting BC, and it plans out a bit of a plan of investment into infrastructure around public
Mm.
transit and
Hmm.
making sure
Yeah.
that there is transportation that connects British Columbians to one another, includes light rail, includes things being
Yeah.
built here, and, all of those things, right? There is a lot of work that can be done here to immediately bring money into the government coffers, but also train up our workforce so that we are a good competitor in the world, in the global
Yeah.
economy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we certainly saw, and I've been thinking about the pandemic times of investments a lot more since I think the BC budget too, where it's like we know governments can move in quickly when there's that pressure to do
Yeah.
so. And some of those investments did look differently than
Mm.
they're looking now, I think, but did put jobs on the ground at the
Mm.
Yeah.
time. So
Yeah.
it's an
True.
interesting policy space.
But also at the same time, federally, we had the same problem with trying to buy some heavy duty Coast Guard icebreakers.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
we've
Mm-hmm.
allowed the shipbuilding industry to atrophy and the skills as well.
Yeah.
And you could inject money into an economy, but it takes a lot longer to build a shipyard and
Mhm.
build the shipyard workers' skills. And which is why one of these two new heavy icebreakers is the hull of it is being built in
Mm-hmm.
Finland. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
that could be steel that's coming from, my home province,
Yeah. Yeah.
going into ferries or ships anywhere in this country while those mills are under attack. But anyway, that's a bit of a
Yeah.
side story.
I saw the BC jobs minister out talking shipbuilding with
Yeah.
on this
Oh,
week out on tour. So,
oh,
getting some
good.
Yeah.
progress there maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good, good.
Hopefully.
Well,
Yeah.
the BC Liberals, they defeated the BC NDP back in 2000. And the next year, when 37% of BC workers were union members, they amended labor laws, including blocking the card check route to union certification. And then after 2017, the NDP came back in 2019, restored card check certification. Union membership had fallen to 28% by that time. But since
Yeah.
the change, it's rebounded a bit up to 31. just how important do you feel card check is as a route to ensure that workers have access to collective bargaining? And what about other changes, legal or
Yeah.
otherwise, that need to be made to help more workers access collective bargaining?
Yeah, for sure. When we're talking about card check or single step certification, as the
Yep.
government calls it,
Hmm.
we've long time called it card check. And so
Yeah.
we're having a hard time evolving, I guess. But, it's critical, right? Especially in times when people are struggling. Unions are the answer for folks, right? The workforce is changing and evolving, the economic downturn, workers are the unemployment rates are increasing, right? We know that unions are a solution for a lot of people. Like, there is no social program, there's no sort of tax incentives that government can do or a business strategy that lifts people standards of work, their standards of pay, than being part of a union, right? Than having that union card in your wallet, whether it's, physical or virtual. We know that this actually changes people's lives, right? And of course, there's more changes that we need to see. We've been having a lot of conversation with government around things like sectoral bargaining,
Hmm.
especially when we're talking about different types of workers and the evolving, changing face of work and how people work, as well as first contract legislation. Been pushing for that as well. One of the hardest things for workers who get into a union for the first time is getting across the goalpost,
Hmm.
right? Being able to
Hmm.
get their first collective agreement. And so, there needs to be some standards around that, a bit of a framework, because, we aren't going to be sitting around and waiting for government to do these things. We're going to keep pushing. We're going to keep our foot on the gas
Yeah.
and make sure, and also we're doubling down on organizing, right? We're talking
Mhm.
to all of our affiliated unions about how important organizing works are. We're, making sure workers have access, and we're just about to launch a new campaign, which I'm really excited about. Just a little sneak peek about it. It's going to be launching kind of in the later spring and all across the summer. And it's our Unions Are For You campaign. And
Hmm.
we are going to be targeting all workers who don't have unions, but especially younger workers or workers in different types of industries that haven't traditionally seen themselves in unions, and
Hmm.
newcomers to the country as well. And the message is really clear. It is like, if you want to make work better, you want to earn more money, you want to get a bit more respect at work, then unions are for you, right? And unions, of course, are for all of us. The stronger that, workforce is together, that collective voice that people have, the more of a counterweight they are to sort of that corporate power that people often feel in the work sites, big or
Mhm.
small. And of course, the more room it gives government to be able to take some of the actions and do those bold moves we were talking about earlier, as well, right? And so I'm pretty excited about it. You'll see some hot pink toques floating
All
around
right.
likely, and some fun campaign material. And we're going to be out all over the province, spreading the message. We'll be at community festivals and pride festivals, and just wherever workers are, farmers markets and things like that. Wherever people are, we're
Hmm.
going to be out there talking about how important
Hmm.
it is to think about being in a union, right?
Hmm.
It's
So
a simple message.
it's
Unions are for
kind of
you. Yeah.
community based idea.
Yeah,
Is it? Yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
Real grassroots, right?
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nice. We'll have to talk about that when it's underway.
Yes.
So a little bit of a pivot here into politics. So, and the caveat is that we, of course, know that in your role with the federal NDP, you take your neutrality pretty seriously in these
Yeah.
matters, as you
Yeah.
should. I can say as former staff, as anyone should. So, but we've got convention after we have this show air. Tom and I are going to be there. We have a special
Great.
show being cooked up with Doug's support, so that'll be fun from
Cook-
live from convention.
Cooked
Not
up.
live, but cooked up.
Man, that
Little
sounds
teasers here.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
I love it. I love
I
it.
think we're in like a Breaking Bad episode or something. I don't know.
We're just letting that,
Okay. All
finally
right.
getting ranked in the podcast go to our head. But yeah. The but let's talk a little bit about the federal NDP and the labor movement.
Hmm.
So, of course, the NDP is created in this partnership between labor movement, progressive social movements, and in any ways of our history, labor's role has been integrated structurally. That's changed over time at different moments as well, but always there in some way to reflect that. So, but of course, any alliance in any sort of, we see this in all parties, and we certainly are not, it doesn't exclude us in the NDP. It does take time. It needs to move forward. And sometimes that can be, really clumsy in the execution of it to keep the whole alliance together. So we're nearing the end of this could be elongated NDP leadership race. It probably
Mm.
Yeah.
feels long to you as someone
Yeah.
who's been in an executive role. And so what we're kind of interested, though, in thinking a little bit more is about that role for the next NDP leader and how they build some of the strength with the labor movement and bring that magic alignment into the picture here.
Yeah. Uh, Look, I don't actually think there's any great mystery to this. Whoever should be the lucky winner, the leader that takes steps
Yes.
into the role after convention once the announcement's made. It's going to be critical that they recognize that the labor movement and the party, that we are partners, that it is from the beginning of the
Uh-huh.
existence of the party, the labor movement has been there. We are key partners in the success of the new Democratic Party of Canada and provincially all across the country as well. It's actually our superpower, I would like to
Uh-huh.
say. It's what makes us
Hmm.
what we are. And of course, we have common values, right? We have the
Yeah.
same values of solidarity, of justice, and equity. And, gosh, the last several months have illustrated why we need an NDP, in Parliament, right? Why we
Yeah.
actually need new Democrats' voices in the Parliament in strength, right? I mean, we
Yeah.
have a small but mighty caucus right now, but as Carney continues to kind of shift to the right even further than some of us expected him to, uh, you know, it's going to be more critically important that we continue to build those relationships, right? That the partnership continues even through hard times, right? And that
Yeah.
not being afraid of working through our differences together, right? We've done amazing things. New Democrats have done
Uh-huh.
amazing things with very little resources. Anti-scab legislation is huge for working people. Pharmacare, we talked about that, and childcare, universal, like the push for more universal childcare. Already talked about dental care
Uh-huh.
and my lovely dad, but it like things like that are things that we did together. They're things that we
Yeah.
fought for in the labor movement, but also the party was fighting for them as well. And because we did them together, we were able to be successful
Mm.
in them. And what I would say to whoever the new leader is, on Monday morning when they wake up and start their new life, is that like to embrace that deeper involvement with the labor movement, right?
Yeah.
And that as the labor movement, we also need to embrace it, and we need to dig in and work even harder. That we need to make sure that we see, the federal politicians from our party at local events, participating in things all around the country.
Yeah.
I mean, look, we know the conservatives, particularly the conservatives, are showing up in our workplaces. You see it all
Uh-huh.
the time, right? You see it all the time in every sector. Our folks need to do that, and we need to do it better.
Yeah.
And we need to give something people to vote for, right? And of course, the other piece that the leader and the party, needs to continue to, and of course, the labor movement, we have a huge role in this, is making sure there's actually labor candidates on the ballot.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Making sure there are people from the labor movement who
Yes.
understand unions and the value of unions, that we're making sure that their names are on the ballot, and not just on that ballot, but actually getting elected.
Mhm.
Because we
Uh-huh.
know when working people are in parliament or they're in the legislatures, good decisions are made. Good decisions about working people happen. And so we need more of that. And that's our work to do as well in conjunction with the party between the
Mm.
two. Yeah.
A minute ago, you just mentioned in passing sectoral bargaining, and that's
Mm,
something we've bandied around a little bit here.
yeah.
Uh, the way most labor legislation in Canada is set up, unions mostly bargain with a single employer at a single location. But some say this framework puts workers in competition with workers, and sector wide bargaining would bring more stability, greater union density, and help organize smaller workplaces. Um, but Is it a good thought in theory with too many transitional complications in practice? Is there a
Well,
path to getting the politics right to make that kind of
yeah.
change, to make that kind of shift?
Yeah, I think so. Look, we already have sectoral bargaining in
Mhm.
multiple sectors, in
Mhm.
healthcare, in the building trades, and construction. We see it in community social services, and in other areas, right? And so we actually already know here in BC, it's actually a proven winner. It works for working people, right? And the path to getting there is simply the vision to do it,
Mhm.
and of course the political will to make it happen. And the truth is that a lot of workers are getting left behind right now. The structure that their work makes it really tough to actually join a union, to be able to organize thoughtfully. We have folks who are in small, isolated workplaces or
Mhm.
individual workplaces. We have gig workers, right? The growth of gig workers in this country
Yeah.
is astronomical. But we've seen some good wins there with UFCW 1518 and, with Uber on the
Yeah, the
island and,
Uber group, yeah.
Amazon and all
Yeah.
of that, right? So we're seeing some successes as well, but we're also getting a lot of calls and folks reaching out, people who are doing jobs like dental hygienists, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Or housekeepers. And collectively, when they come together and set some
Yes,
standards for themselves, it's
Yeah.
not a lot
yes.
to actually ask to have, like, what are we all going to get paid for this exact same job that we're doing?
Mhm.
Is there a way we can build in some kind of retirement security into this work that we're doing? Could we have some extended benefits so that
Yeah.
me and my family can get, prescriptions and
Mhm.
be able to get the medical care that we need? Like, that's what happens here, is that people start getting better working conditions and all of that. And it's complex. It's not simple. But I mean, really, like, let's give ourselves some credit. Let's give our friends, I'm going to say provincially here, I'm going to give our friends in government some credit. We're actually capable of doing hard things
Yeah.
together.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And I'm quite confident that we can get this one, that we can win on this one. And what that means is a win for workers, right?
Let's talk a little bit about some of those hard things and think about BC a bit. So obviously, you're a leader in the BC labor movement, and we have a BC NDP government, have since 2017 now, which is creeping up to a decade. And so, of course, like we've talked about, since the changes in the U.S. administration, BC and other jurisdictions have had this hard push into the economic development, the building the resiliency within our borders, pretty big changes from where they would have
Mm,
been 2 years ago or even 18 months ago. And so, given that, BC's in a federation, there's so many levers that are actually pulled in Ottawa. What sort of
mhm.
role can the federal party, the federal NDP, play as it rebuilds, which is, a big job in itself, but as it rebuilds, in also advocating for workers in BC and then considering in where BC's economic focus lays?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would say, like the two are part of the same, right? As we, sort of rebuild the party, and we start, getting our strength back up and all of that, that we need to lean into places like British Columbia, right?
Hmm.
British Columbia is a key part of the key foundation of the party, and other places obviously as well. I mean, there's going to be other places where they're going to have to lean into, but here in British Columbia, we have historic support for
Yeah.
for the party across the province, and for the values and and policies that New Democrats push. So I think we need to sort of lean in and not shy away from the thorny issues, right? Economy. We talk about the economy, and we talk about workers, we talk about the climate, and all of those things, and pretend that these things can be solved sometimes like the other guys do, and what I like to call the bumper sticker
Hmm.
solution through,
Mhm.
3 word
Yeah,
Yeah.
little
yeah, yeah.
lingo-y type things, but like actually not be afraid to do the work and be able to communicate that out to people, right? Should not be a
Yeah.
fight, internally about what's important to us. We need to make sure that working people here in British Columbia, and then of course across the country, know that the NDP's on their side, and we actually need to lean into that, whether you work in a mill, a mine, a ministry, or a mall, right? Even more important, as party power here in British Columbia, it's an opportunity, right, to be able to
Hmm.
um,
Yeah,
come
represent
up with
that. Yeah.
solutions that are
Yeah.
tangible and be able to be immediately relevant,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And not be afraid to work with us, right? And lean into our relationship and recognize the importance of our relationship with the government as well. And it's hard to go wrong if you start and end with a recognition that working people are the engine of the economy and the heart of all of our communities and
Yeah.
all that sort of falls within that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think too, though, just building on that, we're seeing, the BC Conservative leadership race, that the Conservative movement's also seeing BC as having huge potential for building their movement. We saw,
Hmm.
I think it was a National Post article this week, all of that sort of focus we're seeing. So I think, BC workers are going to be pretty cross-pressured from
Hmm.
parties telling them who to vote for and who's going to
Yeah.
benefit them. And again, back to like just going to fill gas in the car, right? So I
Yeah.
think it's going to be a lot of work both on a rebuild, but also
Yeah.
talking to workers right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And, we talk specifically about that, right? It is important to know what's going on, what the parties are actually doing, right?
Mhm.
Just last week on the heels of the Building Trades Convention, while we were all over in Victoria and all the construction building trade workers are all, over
Yeah.
there, they're lobbying government. The steel workers were also lobbying government that same week. And the
Mhm.
firefighters were also lobbying government. It was a very busy week in Victoria, as you can imagine. Literally the Thursday of that week, the Conservative
Yes.
Party put
Yes.
legislation
Yeah.
together, as you heard, about getting rid of PLAs and CBAs. Like,
And now they're
it's a
onto
bit of
this
a
in
gift,
yeah. Now they're onto this in
right?
Yeah.
Manitoba too, I see.
Well, it's
This
just
the
showing
same
workers who you
idea.
really are,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. And, when people show us who they are, we should
Yes.
believe them. And that does, you're trying to
Just
break away some of the core fundamental values of working people.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
just to backtrack, and if people are super interested in
Sure.
this, we should go back and see the interview we did a couple of weeks, 3, 4, 5 weeks ago with Bryn. But the essence of this is that unions, the trades, have negotiated agreements that have community benefits and education to
Yeah.
create the skilled workforce that we need, so we can do these jobs domestically with workers that are here in this country. And those were built up over time. And here the conservatives are like, no, this is big unions
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
regulation, and
Yeah.
kind of wild thing to do, because
Yeah.
as an Ontarian, I see that the building trades were kind of the opening door, or the door that
Yeah.
the conservatives opened first,
Yeah.
around the skilled trade agenda. And then you would have thought the conservative movement would have understood that actually that's just a smart thing to do. And it's good politics.
Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
they're
Well, and
flushing
they
it
showed
away.
workers who they really are, right? And
Yeah.
who they
Yeah.
actually stand behind. And it's not working
Weird.
people, right?
Yeah.
Or
Well, we also, I
communities.
think, and I think we're expanding on our last question, Present, but I think also
Yes.
what we talked about with Bryn too was just, I think, the realization that if skilled trades hadn't been eroded under the BC Liberal
Right.
government, that we actually would be in a better spot right now for these major projects, for the
Yes.
infrastructure build, for the economic resilience. So,
Yeah.
politicizing skilled trades is now demonstrated as a challenge in
Yeah.
what we're trying to accomplish right now as a country. So I think there's that
Yeah.
disconnect in that politicization of the union agreements when it actually deteriorates our ability to build to the scale we need to be at right now.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Suzanne, thank you so much. Coming back to the top, you got a lot on the go. Many
Yes.
hats. You can now say that you have a hat of being on Left, East to West podcast, and you're welcome to come back
Love it.
anytime,
Yeah. I'm a
anytime
friend.
you want.
Yeah. Like, I'm happy
Friend
to
of
be
the show.
here. Friend of the show.
Friend of the show, yes. So thanks very much for
Yeah.
making time for us. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to checking out your next episodes. It's
Yeah.
in my loop of podcasts, and I
Okay.
encourage anyone else out there listening to this one to
Oh,
make sure
great.
you're in their podcast lists
Well,
too.
thanks so much. And we'll see you at
Thank you.
convention, I
You're
guess.
welcome.
See you in
You
Winnipeg.
will. You will.
All right. Take care.
All right. See you later.
All right. So great interview. Interesting comments from Suzanne. So she has been really carrying a lot of load in the BC Labor and Party movement for quite a while,
Yeah.
Nikki? And from Prince George. So what's the? I mean, I've never been to Prince George. I know Prince George is kind of a forestry town, a little bit off on the side. So
Mhm.
that's a key part of the province as well, is it not, for the NDP to maintain representation in those kind of areas?
Yeah,
And
and I think
she'll understand that kind of voter.
She does, yeah, and she's been down in for her new current role, or not her new role anymore, the BC Federation
Uh-huh.
of Labour. She's
Yeah.
Lower Mainland based now, but yeah, she was in Prince George. In 2013, she ran for the NDP
Oh,
in
okay.
Prince George,
Interesting.
so
Yep.
against now former BC Conservative leader John Restad. So
Oh,
real battle there on like what those issues are, and a lot of communities that are very resource based and
yeah.
understanding. I think it does really help to have someone sitting though at the table for the table officers for both the federal and provincial NDP who does think about what voters in some of these areas in the
Yeah.
province, because they do
Well,
mirror in other provinces as
sure.
well.
I mean, United States, they often talk about how, how's it going to play in Peoria, but you
Yeah,
could ask the question, how's it going to play in Prince Albert or
totally.
Prince George
Yeah.
or
And
Kitchener,
there's seats we
Ontario?
have held at different points depending
Absolutely.
on
Absolutely.
the political. I say they probably
That's
could be
right.
battlegrounds again. So
Now, they are
yeah,
battlegrounds for the NDP
yeah,
when they're at a good tide and when they
and a
are going
good
to
yeah,
make gains, when they're going to
yeah,
make gains. And
yeah,
I know I used to live in Regina, and Prince Albert is key.
yeah,
Moose Jaw and Prince Albert are key. You can win all the seats in Saskatoon, you can win all the seats in Regina, but if you're not taking some of those, you're not government, and the bad guys are in.
yeah,
So you got to
yeah,
understand that. Although,
yeah,
how does it play in Prince George or
yeah,
PG?
absolutely.
I've heard that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and
All
too, and
right.
I think if you look at the current government, there's a lot of the BC Conservatives hold those seats right now. So you do
Yes.
get that sway, right, on voices from the Carson's twins. So yeah, it was a great interview. Lots
Yep.
going on. She couldn't be busier, and I'm sure we missed some things, but it's a busy time for busy labor leaders.
Uh,
So
yeah. Well, she'll be back on another time, I'm sure, to
I'm
keep
sure.
us up to date. Okay, so let's take a break, and we'll be right back with Love It or Heave It. Before we wrap up, we're at that part of the show we call Love It or Heave It, about something we love and want to keep, or something we'd like to heave and forever forget. What do you got, Nikki?
Well, there's a new documentary on Netflix. People might have seen it already because it's been a hot topic around the water cooler. It's called Inside the Manosphere, and I think it's coming up everywhere. I think it's most of my
Hmm.
Instagram feed right now is memes about it, which is I think what the part I'm loving is the fact that it's this documentary from Louis Theroux has like heightened the conversation about something we've talked about on the show, which is the
Hmm.
Manosphere. We talked about it in the context of anti-feminist ideology being raised as a national security risk in Canada. So what I'm actually really enjoying about this is just to see the mainstreaming of knowledge, its starting point about the manosphere. So I think, there's a lot of debate right now about whether it goes far enough, if it really digs into some of the
Hmm.
influencers that are within the documentary. But I actually think it's just starting a new wave of conversation, which is the part I'm really keen on, but also a wave of conversation about why we are seeing this phenomenon of the manosphere, which
Hmm.
has, a lot of trends into the far right as well. But there's a lot that happens here, and you start to see it in the documentary. So, good on Netflix for showing this about how economic frustration is emerging, and rightfully so in many ways for young men in particular, I think. But what's happening is it's getting redirected by these influencers into gender blame instead of that ability to have some structural analysis about the real challenges that we have globally, which are impacting people's lives. So, being able, I think, to have something on Netflix that starts to dig into how we are seeing this economic displacement, how, young men are really struggling with job insecurity, with not understanding some of the costs of living that they're now experiencing, that, we've talked about even on this show, things that they might have traditionally thought as a pathway that previous generations had to stability, to stability, and which are real pressures from global wealth inequalities as well. So, love the part where people are talking about the manosphere.
Hmm.
Hopefully, get to the part where we see some, policy change and real conversation about what is happening here and why. And again, you see in the documentary itself this sort of fandom around these influencers who are driving such a real misdirection here. I think
Yeah.
about where some of this injustice is occurring for younger generations.
Mm. Yeah, it does feel a little bit like the worm is turned on this one, to me. But I guess and maybe this is my specific viewpoint, is what really disturbs me about what I see from the manosphere. In addition to the economic misdirection you talk about, is the focus on the most two-dimensional and comparable things about being a man, like no
Mhm.
depth. no depth
Yeah.
about what is it to be a good man or a good person. And
Yeah.
so it ends up being kind of like this idea of, it's like subjugation to a form, um, that is, it's trying to tell you, you got to be like this. But it's
Mhm.
all very, very two dimensional.
Yeah.
And then it tries to pass itself off as self help, but actually, it's really damaging to men,
It is, yes.
to be told that it's not about how what kind of person you are. It's about these measurable, comparable, and you're never good enough.
Yeah.
That's that seems to me the feel. Um,
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah,
Anyway.
yeah, you can see that, and I think, some of the criticism is it's not really talking enough about the impact on women, but I agree with you that showing how it's driving the narrative about men and, where they should be in terms of maybe very unattainable standards for them increases that level of anger and frustration when you
Well,
can't reach them, so dangerous all around, right?
yeah, yeah, and I guess it might be fair to say, and probably important to say, that women in a lot of have dealt with the two dimensional issue forever.
Yes.
But
Yes.
now it's about men's look and looks maxing and all kinds of crazy stuff. Where
Yeah.
it's like, wait a minute, we're just going to adopt the same, or are we're gonna decide, like, we're gonna fall into the same trap, or we're gonna decide that
Yeah.
we're free to choose our own identities and our own ideas.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
hopefully with a little bit less of the anti-feminist rhetoric and the
That would
underlying
be that would be
messaging.
nice. Yeah. Well, to me, Nikki, it seems like if you're going down that path of like it being a good person, um, you're not gonna be an anti-feminist, anti-woman. I mean,
Mhm.
it just
Yeah,
follows. Anyway.
yeah. So what are you loving or heaving this week, Tom, with lots going on in the world?
Yeah. Well, I am heaving the price at the pump.
Yeah.
The war Trump and Netanyahu's have launched, is destroying refineries in Iran, Saudi, Kuwait, Qatar, and maybe Bahrain. And that, we are told, is why the price of fuel has gone up 30% from $1.31 a liter uh, to about 170, 171 here in Toronto anyway. But the thing is, only about 2 or 3% of what Canadians buy at the gas station comes
Yeah.
from any of the Gulf states whose refineries are being bombed or ships are being blocked. About 75 to 80% of our fuel comes from refineries here in Canada. Most of our imported oil comes from the United States. Like, overwhelmingly of that quarter that comes from somewhere else, it comes from the United States. Another chunk comes from Nigeria. There's no bombings of any refineries in those places. Those refiners' costs didn't change, but your costs did.
Yeah.
When you fill up your 80-liter tank and it costs $135 this week rather than $105 last month, who got the
Yeah.
$30 off you? Stock market indexes have been plunging because of this war, but not all stocks. Stock prices last week of companies like Canadian Natural Resources, Enbridge, Cenovus Energy, and Sunoco are all well up, even in this stock market meltdown. That tells you who's getting your $30.
Yeah. Yeah, my teensy tiny car was very expensive to fill today. So someone's getting my $30 for sure. But
Yeah.
I think too, this goes back into public anger. And I think even if we tie into the manosphere, like it is that who is the public anger about these things, right? And who's actually has their hand on the decision making, right? Like it is I think, so we're
Mhm.
hopefully getting into some tipping points about people seeing where these problems are actually stemming from. And they're not what we're generally told by a Trump or a Manosphere. So yeah, I think this is going to be a pain point for a lot of people, and it's going to push
Yes.
back onto politicians.
Well,
But where are the decisions being made?
we saw, there was a news story on Friday, from Reuters, I think it was, and it was that now the bond market is expecting 75 points of interest rate hikes
Mm,
before this year. Um, the Bank of Canada didn't do anything last week,
yeah,
but now we're looking at probably three increases of 25 points, and that basically happened overnight when
yeah,
people realized how disastrous, economically disastrous this war has been,
yeah.
and the kind of impact it's going to have on jobs and economy. And you know what? If you throw interest
Food.
rate increases on top of it, it's just going to make it worse.
Hmm.
So, war is hell, friends.
Yeah, it's happening fast.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's very, very. Why are Canadians so
Depressing end
unhappy?
to our show.
Okay. Well, that is the end of our show. We'll be back next Monday with our special NDP convention edition. More Left, East to West. Take care.
Thanks for joining Left, East to West with hosts Nikki Hill and Tom Parkin. We love to hear your comments, ratings, follows, and shares. It helps people find us. To become a Left, East to West community member and to help us reach even more Canadians, subscribe using the link in the show notes. You can watch us on YouTube or listen wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Just search for Left, East to West and subscribe. I'm Doug Hamilton signing off for Left, East to West. We'll see you next week.